Hey everyone, I'm Derek. This is 11 After 9, and I am so excited to welcome Joe Adams from Blackstone Labs to the 11 After 9 podcast. Joe is a fantastic mind when it comes to what does oil do for your car, it being the lifeblood, and what can it tell you when it comes to the health of your car. Joe is also the velvety voice of the Slick Talk podcast, where he talks about all things lubrication and why it's important to always keep an eye on the fluids of your car. Joe, I want to say thank you so much for being on 11 After 9. You're a wealth of information, and I am going to pummel you with questions when it comes to the things that really mean a lot to me, and that is, how do I keep my cars running and how do I keep them out of the shop?
Hey, Derek, glad to be here. Nothing better than oil analysis to help answer those questions, and I'm glad to do it.
Awesome, man. Thank you so much. So let's do this just because people might be coming to this not ever having heard of Blackstone Labs before. Can you give us a
Mhm.
quick overview of the company, what they do, and maybe more specifically what you do? Because I think it's going to really speak to the process of all of this as we move forward and talk about how it pertains to the cars we own, and then how can we get samples to you, and what are we going to get out of the whole thing?
Yeah, so Blackstone Laboratories has been in the oil analysis game since 1985. And what sets us apart is not simply the data we provide, but the way we explain it. Our reports are easy to understand, whether you are a industry expert or a rookie that's just trying to take care of the car they own. The whole point is that we want you to be able to understand the data that we pull from the sample and then help you out by explaining the sources of metal content, the signs of contamination, hopefully a lack thereof, answering the questions, the comments, the concerns that we have from our customers, be it in the aviation field, automotive. If it has oil in it, then it's a system that we can analyze. And Porsche definitely falls in that category. And we can assist owners that are interested merely by sending us a sample size of 3.5 ounces. That's all it takes to learn how your engine is wearing. And if it's wearing more than we typically see, we'll let you know if that's due to a contaminant we can spot or a problem with the oil itself.
So that's fantastic to know. It's not like I have to shoulder an old milk jug of oil and throw it in the mail to you. So that that's
Some people
great.
have tried. You would be surprised at the capacity that they will intend to fill, but rest assured, all you need is 3.5 ounces.
They really, really want you to get to the bottom of their sample, and they're going to give you a lot, a lot of it.
And we would prefer if you stick to the oil, please.
That's fair enough, and we'll leave that where it is. People's imaginations can fill in those blanks. But
No doubt.
man, it's interesting too, and I just want to note that when you guys do your oil inspections, and you can put it up against the sample sets of
Mm.
thousands of other motors. And so you can give a good idea maybe of how sick your motor might be if it is sick, or if it's wearing correctly. It's not in a vacuum, I guess maybe
Hmm.
I'll say. And those are one of the things we're going to talk about on today's podcast is we're going to touch on the scary subjects of bore score. We're going to
Mm.
talk about IMS issues with the motors,
Hmm.
and how can we tell, are you at the beginning of a potential rebuild down the line? What does that look like? And you can speak from authority because you can simply look those motors up, right? In
Hmm.
terms of your database, and we can talk about those real numbers.
Yeah, so it's really a credit to the Porsche ownership community that they help keep our average files strong. We're not comparing to a handful of samples, we're comparing to samples in the thousands. And a lot of the motors that we're going to talk about today, whether it be the M96, M97, so on and so forth, these are motors that have dedicated communities with ownership interest in not just owning the car, but taking care of it and keeping it on the road for a good long while, whether that be someone who is priding themselves on track use, who may want to mix in a track day here or there, or they
Hmm.
could just be trying to find the ideal oil change interval, the $1 million question for really any engine out there. But whatever the case may be, we're going to assist you by starting with a comparison to our averages, which are built on samples from that model that you have. So if it's an air cooled iteration, we're going to have averages for that. If it's a water cooled 3.6 liter flat six, and then going forward, we can even have averages specific to the DFI iteration of that motor because it helps us help you.
So let's do this. Let's jump right into it. Let's talk about what's near and dear to our hearts in the Porsche world. So Joe, we're a funny bunch. You had complimented Porsche owners for being fastidious and they want to take care of their cars, and I think that that's absolutely true. I also think that because these cars cost a fair amount of money and we fall in love with them, that we are very, just like our children, sometimes we're very worried when they get sick, and we want to just try to make sure that we catch
Hmm.
it early rather than let something linger and potentially metastasize. So, the oil analysis is something that was never really on my radar when I was kind of a younger owner of these cars. I figured as long as I change my oil every 5,000 miles, I'm going to be golden. And I never really thought much past that
Hmm.
because I thought, just kind of like eating healthy, the best defense against anything bad that could happen is just fresh oil in your motor. Let's talk about three different generations of motors because for those of you out there that might not be super familiar with some of the common, I guess, watchouts or issues with water cooled motors. And so these motors are from the 997 generation. There was a dot one and a dot two. So the dot one, '05 to '09, and then the dot two, '09 to 12. And then there's another generation after that called the 991 generation. And those are another set of motors that will take us to 2016.
Hmm.
So for the audience out there, there's a couple issues with these motors. On the earlier motors, the 996 and the 997 motors, there's a worry about the IMS bearing,
Hmm.
which could potentially fail. And there's also a worry about bore scoring.
Hmm.
And this is something that I know I fret about, and I fretted about because I got a bore scope check on my motor, and essentially I wanted to find out if the cylinders had gouges in them
Hmm.
because of a lack of lubrication. And what happens over time is essentially your motor kind of falls apart, it loses compression, and you have to rebuild it. And so that's like a huge fear because I guess you might say that Porsche, with every generation, might have an Achilles heel, and bore scoring and IMS on the earlier 911s for the water cooled, that's kind of their Achilles heel. And I asked you in preparation for this podcast to take a look in your giant repository of engines and motors to give us a sense of, am I out of my mind if I lose sleep at night when it comes to bore scoring? And so let's talk about the motors, base and S, 3.6 liter and 3.8 liter, kind of cover that 996, 997.1 generation,
Hmm.
where I mean, that's where a lot of people are most afraid about the IMS bearings and
Hmm.
most afraid about bore scoring. And could you share some of the numbers that you found looking at those? I mean, is it a 25% of cars, 50% of cars, like the internet would
Hmm.
have you believe, that it's just waiting in your garage to grenade?
Well, it's safe to say that bore scoring in particular, we'll start there. That is a common concern, but the numbers show it's not a common problem. And in order to assess that, what we're going to do is look at three elements in particular. Porsche is unique in that we can see signs of bore scoring in the form of high aluminum, high iron, and high silicon. So when we see these three elements testing high together in these motors, those are hallmarks of bore scoring being a problem in the way an oil analysis can see it. So we're going to look for these elements and compare them to averages. And we're not seeing it at a terribly high rate, which isn't to say that unfortunately your motor can't be affected, but I would think it goes a long way in helping assuage concern that every engine is destined to run into this because, at least from the samples that we're seeing, it's really not as common a problem. In fact, if we just start with the 3.6 liter flat six, we have thousands of samples to look back on. This is one of the larger average files that we have and that we continue to build on a daily basis because so many Porsche owners are dedicated to oil analysis. And when you look at these percentages of samples that have that trio, high aluminum, high iron, high silicon, in the 3.6, we're seeing that at 2.22% of the
Are you so
3.6 flat six samples.
so just over 2%?
Hmm.
this kind of reminds me of IMS, where everyone swears an IMS is going to grenade, and the numbers are like under 5%. So you're saying for the 3.6 motor, you
Hmm.
only see bore scoring evidence in a little over 2%.
The surefire signs, because you can have one of these elements a little out of whack, but it takes that trio to really assume a problem of that nature. And we're only
And
seeing it pop up at that rate. So that's really even lower than I would have. If you had asked me this before I went digging into the numbers, I might have settled around 5 or maybe 8 if I was really feeling generous, but 2.22%, I think that probably even beats, most expectation even on the oil analysis side. I wouldn't have assumed it was even that low, but sure enough, for the 3.6, looking pretty good.
dude, that's awesome. That's amazing. I would have guaranteed you it was 8% or 10%
Mhm.
because it gets such a bad rap on forums,
Mhm.
and people are always talking about how this is an eventuality. It will happen. It just hasn't happened yet.
Mhm.
And that is that makes me sleep. All right, so let's do this. Let's do a small caveat though, right?
Mhm.
And I do think that this is important to mention. Porsche owners can be fastidious, there's no doubt,
Yeah.
but not all Porsche owners are sending their samples into you. And
Mhm.
so my thought process probably is that the Porsche owners that are sending their samples into you are the ones that understand proper warm-up techniques and probably are a little bit more in tune with the health and the lifeblood of their motors.
Mhm.
And so, I mean, would you agree that there's a chance that that 2.2 might be a little skewed based on the sample set of like, you probably have the best of the best owners that really care about their motors?
It's fair to take that into consideration. I think it has to be said. But I would also add that we're seeing a really wide range of ownership in the sense that we're seeing people who are interested in track use populate that average file, people who are not. People who are strictly using their car in the gentlest manner, taking it to a show or two, every year or so. And people who are doing a mix. We have people who are sending in pre-buy samples where they can't speak to how the motor is taken care of. They can only tell us how they would take care of it.
Oh,
We
good
are
point.
seeing the pre-buy. We're seeing the sample that's there first since acquiring the motor. So I think that while I give a lot of credit to the owners that keep our lights on, I also would say that we are getting as generous and as illustrative a spread as one could really ask for.
What a great point. Because you're right. You're getting samples. People are doing pre-purchase inspections. They're sending their oil into you. Is this motor
Hmm.
going to go or not? And you're right. Who knows what kind of life that motor led? And so
Yeah.
that probably does make me a little bit more comfortable that it's not a skewed kind of
Hmm.
sample size. 2.2%. Joe, I mean,
The numbers are good even moving forward from that. I mean, if we just shift gears to the 3.8, a little bit higher at 3.63%, but even so, 3.63, I would have a hard time believing that people would expect it to be that low either, in this building or outside of it. 3.63 looking pretty good. And again, that's for the 3.8 flat 6.
it's this other, kind of old maid's tale that the most of the bore scoring happens with the S motors, the large displacement motors, because
Hmm.
I've heard everything from thinner cylinder walls. And so it doesn't modulate heat as much. And because of that, it tends to bore score more. And um, I think that that tells everything it needs to tell is that it's like 3.5%. I mean, it's under 4% for the S
Hmm.
motors within a variance of a percent and a half of the base motors. And so
Hmm.
where I always thought, get the base motor, be safe, get the base motor.
Hmm.
Maybe that's not it, which is really incredible if you think about it.
Hmm. Yeah, it just goes to show you can go big and still expect a healthy engine, based on these percentages. And really, Porsche in general, it's kind of a treat to look at a lot of their samples, especially wear-in samples can even look pretty clean, right out of the factory. And down the road, it's not necessarily going to make a lot of metal as it ages either. Once you have that maintenance plan dialed in and you have stable trends emerge, I'm not really going to expect a big change in the wear profile just based on odometer mileage either.
So you're talking about when you're talking about engines that are just broken in. People put that 500, 800, 900 mile break-in period, and then they send their oil to you.
Hmm.
So you get them from the birth of the motor, and then you kind of follow it down the journey of however many miles people put on that same motor.
Ideally, I mean, I say ideally because while lemons are rare to find, they do exist. And they do exist whether it's an older model or a newer one that is a recent release. We will see because, as you know, recalls are still a fact of life. And we're going to see some motors that simply never get off on the right foot. And for that reason, when you start with a factory fill and you go from there, we can see, okay, this engine either is showing the progress one should make as break in and sealer wash out, or it's clearly not. And if it's not moving in the right direction, if we see metals that are not improving or getting worse, unfortunately, that can speak to an engine that has not settled in well. The break in process has not been smooth. Maybe there is,
Hmm.
sealer that's been clogging oil passages that hasn't left the system. So it's nice to have that starting point because we can track how things have been evolving or unfortunately not evolving for some motors and tell people if it does appear typical.
So you said something really interesting there that I just want to touch on, and this will be a question I'll ask you in a minute. But you said getting worse or not improving,
Hmm.
and do you see once you get those that trio you described of we might have a problem here? Do you see it where it can hang on and just maintain, or even a sample down the
Hmm.
line maybe even be a little bit better?
Yeah, I can't tell you how many instances I've seen of motors that have been able to improve on one less than ideal report. I think oftentimes when there's been abrupt changes in operation, someone has modified power, they have done a significant increase in track time, and it's led to some increases that we certainly want to keep an eye on. But it's kind of like getting your blood pressure checked, where you can have a less than ideal readout. Now, does that mean you have heart disease? Well, fact of the matter is you need to see how things are trending sometimes. And engines can improve on levels that are less than ideal, levels that have increased just situationally. But the trend will tell the tale of whether or not that was a blip on the radar, whether or not you had high blood pressure because you went to the smokehouse a few too many times in the past
Yep.
month and too many 12-ounce curls. And then things can improve. So it is a situation where analysis will guide you through and tell you the story. Because when the oil's doing its job of cleaning and lubricating, it's picking up that metal, it's picking up and, well, telling you how it's holding up based on its physical properties.
That's super interesting because I kind of think like you take a snapshot of your oil, and you send it to you, and I get it back, and it's like a really bad report, and I'm like, oh my god, this is the end of my motor. Like this
Hmm.
is it. So I guess it's a really good point to be like, well, yeah, but did you just do a track day?
Hmm.
Or are there any additives you can put in your oil to try to help maintain its the engine's current state? These are things we can talk about briefly, but it does make sense that unless it's like catastrophic, and unless you like literally on the report write in a pen, Derek, don't drive this car, then it probably has to be like, okay, well, drive it for another couple thousand miles, send me another sample, and then we'll see how they match up. So at least you have two data points, not one.
Hmm. Yeah, unfortunately, there can be one-offs. There can be situations where sitting in the analyst chair, you've looked at enough samples, you've seen enough patterns where I have told a customer a time or two that if this motor hasn't failed yet, it probably will soon, because sometimes there's just no good explanation for levels that can show up in used oil. But when you're in that gray area and we advise checking back, it means that we can allow some leeway. These are changes that are not unheard of, or they can be associated with operational factors. And that's really the benefit of having an analyst that is not running the numbers through, like an AI program, but is actually referencing the same model, experiencing similar conditions,
Hmm.
and dialing in those comparisons as neatly as we can.
I don't know what you're talking about, Joe. When I get your samples back, I put them on ChatGPT and it tells me the real truth. You don't know what you're talking about.
The whole truth and Well, yeah, nothing but the truth in the case of ChatGPT.
Yeah, nothing but the truth is correct. Before we move on to talking about oil, just and maybe things we can do to try to improve results, can we talk about a couple more motors?
Sure.
So we talked about the normally aspirated motors. So these are like in my 997.1 that I have out in my garage that I was fearful of, and I got a bore scope done. In 2009, Porsche came out with a direct fuel injected motor, and it would completely change the architecture and took away the IMS bearing issue, which was, kind of an issue in the earlier motors. And people generally said, like, "Oh, well, now this is the next generation of Porsche motor. There's no issues." And then years go by, and there's these whisperings in the corners of the internet, Joe, that, the direct fuel injected motors have bore scoring too. Um, I asked you to look into those motors as well. Can
Mm.
you hit me with some numbers?
Yeah, so the extreme skeptics will be satisfied in knowing that bore scoring technically still exists, at least in terms of the signs we can see. But the percentages, well, they may disappoint them a little bit. Because when you look at starting with the 3.6 DFI, we're seeing that trio test high in 1.31% of samples. You move to
You're
the
kidding.
you move to the 3.8, you would think it's a typo because it's virtually the same, 1.35 on the 3.8.
Let's just talk about the fact that on these DFI motors, which everyone talks about, well, these are just almost as bad as the generation before. Be very careful. Get bore scopes. It's a super issue. You're telling me that it's like a rounding error in terms of the amount of bore scoring you're seeing in these motors at under 1.5%.
The samples we're seeing, they look even better. I mean, on average.
These are like thousands of cars. I mean, thousands of
Yeah,
samples.
so yeah, we're in excess of the thousands on the 3.8. So of the DFI iterations, I have the strongest average file for the 3.8
Okay.
DFI, and that's the one with 1.35%. And we're still into the thousands on the 3.4 that we'll talk about next.
So let's roll into the 991. So Porsche comes out with the next generation, 2012 to 2016, new body style.
Mhm,
An iteration on the motor before it's still direct fuel injected, and
mhm.
I have a Boxster in my garage that has a DFI motor in it. We're talking about the 911 motors specifically, but certainly carryover. And people are saying, bore scoring is affecting these
Mm.
too. So what did you find, Joe?
The 3.4, we're looking at 0.75% of
Come on,
samples.
0.75?
0.75 of that trio showing up. And again, we're not talking about 10, 20 samples. It's thousands. So, I mean, hard to take a lot of, I don't know, it's hard to drum up the concern there. But the thing is, people aren't wrong to want to look into this. They're not wrong to want to make sure that their motor isn't the one. But they
Yeah.
don't need to assume that they bought a lemon just because people are still whispering about this issue. It hasn't gone, but it's certainly not more prevalent than we've seen in earlier generations.
Well, there are people on the internet, of course, that rely on fireworks, and they certainly try to say that the 991
Mm,
generation of motors, that 3.4, 3.8 liter, they are just as bad as the earlier motors in terms of bore scoring. And
mm.
you're telling me that it's under 1%. It's 0.75%.
0.75 on the
Yeah.
3.4, which is, again, if I said the first set of numbers was a surprise, this is even more so. And, just goes to show at the end of the day, hot takes, they serve to keep the content fire warm, but they aren't necessarily based in the analysis that you can gain from your oil change.
I'm falling out of my seat because I guarantee you that if I were to walk down the street and point to any car, a Honda, a Toyota,
Mhm.
you name it, most likely they probably have some level of bore scoring that's maybe higher than 0.75%, especially, here in New Hampshire. I mean, I would imagine that this puts a 911 in line with any other manufacturer of, reliable motors where this shouldn't happen.
I wouldn't be shy about having one in the garage. I'll just say that.
Yeah, man. I love that. We're gonna get one for you. What about the 3.8 liter motor in the 991s?
Yeah, so the 3.8, we're only looking at a rate of 1.35%.
So it's minuscule. All right. So worst case scenario. So everyone has to take from this that yes, bore scoring is an issue that has been documented.
Mhm.
Talking to you, Joe, I have extreme comfort in that I can say that it's overblown. If you're going to be spending multiple tens of thousands of dollars on a car for the sake of $500 to have a bore scope done,
Mhm.
I mean, you could call it cheap insurance just to make sure that you are on the better side of not.
Mhm.
I do have a lot of mechanic friends, Joe, that say, "Yeah, I see him. We get him in
Mhm.
and we see him a fair amount." But I wonder too, it's kind of like selection bias, right? Like if cars are having an issue and they go to the mechanic, then mechanics are going to see cars with issues, right?
Mhm.
So unless it's someone that only does pre-purchase inspections, where hopefully they have like a general like population of cars that they can say yes and no, mechanics that often tell me like, "Oh, I would never buy this car. Everyone's a problem."
Mhm.
Sometimes I say, "Well, everyone you see is a problem because you're the guy that people go to with the problem."
Yeah.
Um,
Mhm. Yeah, that's a
and
good point.
so Yeah. Now, I'm not saying that's the case for bore score, but I'm saying that you told me that's the case for bore score because these numbers are ridiculous.
Mhm.
And you've blown my mind. 0.75%, 1% for
Mhm.
the 991 generation of motors.
Mhm. Yeah.
Um, so let me ask you this. We talked about you are starting to see the angry trio, the ticking time bomb potentially.
Mhm.
Um, and you use the term of high blood pressure, you use kind of that analogy, which I absolutely love. Like, let's say you have high cholesterol, right? You have a
Mhm.
couple symptoms. Do you have lifestyle modification? Like, as in, you shouldn't take your car to the track as much,
Mhm.
or take extra precautions. I want to talk more about the medication route that someone with high cholesterol might have. And by that, I mean, what can you do to the oil you put in your car to try to maintain or perhaps improve the degradation of your engine if you are starting to show these signs? Do you have any suggestions when it comes to that?
So the nice thing about API certified products that meet the owner's manual specs, the brand or blend doesn't really matter. Now that isn't to say that there aren't differences in the various brands or blends that you can buy. They certainly all have their own shtick. They all have their own recipe that promises to be better than the rest. But we don't see a noticeable difference just depending on the oil you run. And that is a good thing in the sense that if you're buying an API certified product with the correct viscosity, you can bank on it providing the necessary wear protection. When you have a problem, no oil in the world's going to make it go away. So people can obsess over the wrong thing, which is buying the perfect oil for that engine. Which,
Right.
if there was a perfect oil with all the competition in the industry, you can bet that the oil companies would know about it. You can bet that there would be a known quantity in that area. So when you talk about lifestyle changes, equating that to vehicle ownership, just focus on buying an oil that fits the manual and fits your wallet. Start there. As far as additives that go beyond what's in the oil, it's kind of redundant, and just kind of stick with the analogy we have building so far. How many supplements do you see marketed that are promised to, lengthen your lifespan, to make this or that issue go away, when in reality,
Yep.
eat a healthy diet. And if you want to take a supplement on top of it, okay, but at some point there's more present than what your body can know to do with. And it's similar when it comes to additive packages, where people may obsess with adding more molybdenum or more phosphorus and zinc. And I just think there comes a stopping point where the motor can't really make use of all the exorbitant amounts of additive that people want to pack in there. It's like, okay, you can take 30, vitamin C pills, but that doesn't
Yep.
mean that your body can use all of that. And similar with additive packages, I think people are wanting to supplement with more of this or that element, whatever the case may be. If it's an API certified product, it has enough additive in it to cover the bases.
So in essence, what you're saying is uh, it's the Porsche uh, comparison of peeing out fluorescent pee because you've taken too many supplements that your body can't absorb. I mean, essentially, you're putting additives in oil that perhaps only to a threshold can your motor really enjoy the benefits of.
Yeah, I think there just comes a point where you need to move away from what you're using and look at how you're using the motor you're putting it in. Are you
So
paying
that's an
attention
interesting
to the
point. Yeah,
system?
expound on that a little bit. What do you mean?
Yeah, so I think that when we see differences in the wear profile, often that's more so related to operational factors. Whether or not people are going to the track, that can influence a wear profile. But we can also see some motors are fit for it. It's never a one size fits all, and that's why you need to go the analysis to see how the engine is responding to it. The oil is the key to learning what's going on in your engine, but the oil doesn't necessarily dictate what's going on in the engine. It's your key to finding out what's going on without having to open it up. Like recently, I looked at a few different 3.8 flat six DFIs. Now, these were from two different owners, but three samples in total. One sample, the owner put roughly 3,500 miles in the oil. They mixed in some track time, and the sample looked good. We didn't see levels that were remotely high compared to averages. Then they ran the oil longer. They went about 5,500 miles. They added in more track time. The levels did not look so good. We saw increases that could show excess wear in the bores. Now, one might look at that and say, oh, well, if I have a 3.8, I just don't need to go 5,500 miles and I'll be fine. But then I looked at another owner's sample with virtually the same mileage. They noted track time on their oil information slip, and their sample looked very good. It looked as good as that other customer's initial sample that had fewer miles on it. So it's never one size fits all. Every motor has its own story. And I think that different owners are going to, I mean, Porsche owners are very proud of their individuality. And I think that you can bank on one owner treating their car not poorly, but they can be more demanding of it than the next guy. Or maybe they are, you know, just simply their day-to-day operation doesn't compare. And I think that's where we can see those changes shine through, because in none of the cases I've mentioned are they running like some bizarre food grade oil concoction or some,
Yeah.
brew of five different brands or blends. No, they went and bought a brand or blend that we all know by name, and then it was probably the same 040 with the same additive package, and that's all well and good. It's about what the oil has in it that will tell you if you're doing the right things, whether that be the right oil change interval, the right amount of track days mixed in, or if you are having contamination that you didn't know about that is causing the engine to wear more than it should. That's really the silent killer, whether you're Porsche or anyone else. Having contaminants that are in the system in those microscopic levels that you wouldn't know about, but the
Mhm.
oil does. So that's really what can affect the wear profile in the long term.
What strikes me and what I get frustrated about is I want to have a silver bullet. Like you just said to me, 3,500 miles looks great. 5,500 miles, both with track time, it didn't look great. And so, like you just said, my mind goes, okay, if someone asks me, how long should I change my oil if I track my car sometimes? I want to have an answer.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the answer is there is no answer because every motor is very different. I mean, if you have that example of two very different owners with two very different results with the same use case,
Mm-hmm.
it's like, well, maybe one engine just is wearing better than another, and that's just the way of things. And
Mm-hmm.
you just unfortunately have to, fortunately have to send your oil in to Joe to tell you how your motor's doing.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like, just to beat this analogy to death about the health of a body,
Yeah.
it is just like, being genetically predisposed to heart disease versus someone who's not. You can be as healthy in lifestyle as you want, but sometimes you just genetically, that's how you're built and that's how
Mm-hmm.
the motor's built. And maybe
Mm-hmm.
that's like a really good way to look at it, that the only way to figure it out is to get your blood taken and
Hmm.
get those results, and that's your oil sample.
Hmm.
Um, do you see? I know you talked about kind of the API standards. Do you see any additives in oil that ever help?
We don't see a significant improvement in wear as a result of using this additive or that additive. But I hesitate a little bit when people will go to the extreme and say, okay, so they're all useless, because in truth, I think some of them have practical purposes that do pan out. We
Okay.
see a lot of, instances of viscosity improvers or oil savers where if you have a consumption issue, if you have a leak that you need to slow down, those can have the real world impact of assisting in that area. But it's whether it's an additive or an oil off the shelf, that's not what's saving your motor from destruction. The oil, however, is going to assist you in knowing what's going on.
Mm,
So,
to get to the bottom of it.
mhm,
So pivoting, um, I live in New Hampshire. Uh, it's, it's Joe. It's cold all the time in New
mm,
Hampshire lately. This has been a long winter. And we put our cars up on the lift or in the
mhm,
garage under a cover to take a nap for a couple months at a time. I get a lot of questions when I put my car away. Do I put it away with dirty oil? Like, let's say that I did 2,000 miles in my 911 or 2,500 miles in my 911. Do I put it away with dirty oil, potentially with maybe moisture in the oil? Do I just put it away and change it in the spring when I'm going to be driving it?
mm,
Or before I put it away, do I drive it really hard and try to burn off all the moisture in the
mm,
in the oil
mm.
to try to put it away so it's as clean as it can be, even though it's dirty? Or do I put it away and change the oil before I put it away so it's got clean oil in the motor? So in the spring when it wakes up, I can drive it immediately and not worry about it.
So on its face, a 2,000 mile interval, 2,500 miles, whatever the case may be, that's not necessarily too much before you put the car into storage and then take it out for the next season. But like I mentioned earlier, you want to know how that oil looks in testing regardless of who you are, what car you have, because how that oil looks in testing could dictate whether or not that oil change interval needs to be shorter, but it's never the calendar time that you have to take into consideration. It's always the miles, because you talk about moisture, that can be a common concern out there, but it's another one of those things that's not a common problem, because you're only going to have moisture buildup in a modern engine if it has a
Hmm.
coolant leak. You're not going to have just moisture from the atmosphere accumulating. That was a problem for engines with open breathers, not a problem for today's designs. So you can cross it off your list of concerns and just rest on the mileage, because if you put that motor into storage and it's had that oil in there for 2,000 miles, well, if that oil change interval is known to you and doesn't involve a lot of metal content having built up. You have a sample history where hey, I know that 2,000 miles for me doesn't involve a lot of metal for this engine. And I know from analysis that contamination isn't a concern for me. And I know that my air and oil filtration systems have been up to par during an interval of this length, based on the solids that are present, based on evidence of dirt contamination, both of which we're going to see. Then you can have confidence in, say, putting that vehicle into storage with 2 or 3 or 4,000 miles, depending on what you've got, and then taking it out and then accumulating the amount of mileage that you want. And with every sample, you can have confidence in either the interval you're running being a good one. You
Hmm.
can note that you have interest in extending that interval. We'll tell you if that's okay. And of course, we'll let you know if a shorter interval would be ideal. But whatever the case may be, bring it back to the miles. Don't obsess over the calendar time.
So why does Porsche say that it's like, you have to replace the oil every 10,000 miles or every 1 year? And that's kind of the recommendation.
Well, I think whether it's manufacturer of the engine or an oil company, they have to draw a line somewhere with regards to calendar time. And I think 12 months becomes an industry standard that's repeated over and over, no matter who it is, whether it's Porsche. I've had GM tell me that. I've had Honda tell me that. And so I think that whatever the case may be, Miles are where we see that metal accumulated. That's where we see the oil actually breaking down from its job of cleaning and lubricating. The additive package doesn't go away, that's for sure, just based on how long it's been sitting. I've seen samples that have been in vehicles where the owner reported it being installed 7 years ago, 10 years ago, and it didn't necessarily look bad in terms of the physical properties. The viscosity would be in range. The TBN that we test would show active additive left. Now, those samples may not have had a ton of mileage, but that's the point. The miles are when the oil is actually doing its job, and that's when it loses its effectiveness over the course of its lifespan, not based on days or months or years.
So that's interesting. And I think
Mhm.
about my motorcycles. I have a couple old motorcycles that I just never have the chance to really ride. And so if I put 150 miles on one in a season, that's like a good year.
Mm,
And I really get after myself because I'm like, oh, I should be changing the oil. If not every year, then every other year, every 300 miles, because it's been 2 years.
mm,
What you're telling me is if I change my oil and I use a good oil filter, I use API okayed oil,
mhm,
that bike can sit, or that Porsche can sit in my garage for
mhm,
3 seasons, 4 seasons. And if I only accumulate X number of miles that I know are safe, according to
mhm,
having the inspection done by you guys, it's not going to be like the oil isn't doing its job when I
mhm.
when I use it in that fourth season. It doesn't have anything to do with time.
No, and I wouldn't say it's terribly unusual for us to see clients send in samples where they have accumulated a season or two because that's how long they need to rack up a decent amount of hours or miles, whatever the case
Yeah,
may be. So if you are in a position where you simply don't want to trust the calendar time theory, then you can always take a sample without changing the oil, send it off, and we can tell you, hey, all good here. Or you can proceed with just changing the oil and then waiting to hear back that way. But people don't even have to do a full oil change. If they want to take a sample with a vacuum pump from the dipstick and don't change it, sometimes that's a really smart choice depending on how expensive their oil change is, because oil
sure.
changes can be pretty crazy depending
Yep.
on the sump capacity that you're rolling with. So a $40 sample can tell you, hey, uh, we knew calendar time wasn't a concern, but if this gives you some peace of mind, rest assured, based on XYZ, factors, you're in good shape.
So that's something I could just like go on Amazon and get like an oil extractor that just has kind of a long tube. You put it down your dipstick and
hmm
and extract oil.
So actually,
Unless
we sell one on our website as well if you would rather not go that route, but you can order one from Amazon, you can go to the hardware store, you can order one from us. Wherever you find it, all you need is a hand pump and some refrigerator tubing, and then that will go down the dipstick tube. You pull up a sample, and then again, 3.5 ounces is nowhere near a significant amount relative to most sump capacities.
yeah, especially Porsche, we
hmm
have lots of oil in our motors.
Yep.
Of course, the smart people out there are like, well, Derek, Porsche did away with dipsticks quite some time ago. And so would you feel comfortable just opening up the oil cap and taking a sample from there?
It can be a messy extraction process, but if you don't mind it, that oil counts just as much.
So it's not like it has to be like from the bottom of the sump or the idea would be that you run the car, let it cool down, and then that oil's mixed enough that whatever sample you take from wherever it is should give a representative sample.
Yeah, so oil does a good job of holding everything in a pretty even suspension, because we're looking at microscopic metals that are far too small to see with the naked eye. That stuff is held in a nice even suspension. The visible stuff can settle, but generally when we're looking at elements in part per million, that's a pretty even spread. So you don't have to obsess over, the exact location, of where that oil was from, whether it's towards the end of the drain or the start of the drain. The only real concerns, and I say real, but real world concerns, I guess I should say, if you sample right at the start of a drain, sometimes you can get some excess dirt or debris from around the drain plug area. But I
Hmm.
mean, in terms of metal content that's going to speak to how that engine is wearing, you should get a pretty good look. I think in most cases, if you're in an ideal situation during an oil change, just waiting for a midstream sample that is not so far towards the end you miss the drain and not right at the beginning where you can get some debris. Yeah, that's, I guess I should say, the picture perfect sample. But when you're just trying to grab one in a pinch and you need to see how that oil looks, it's okay if it's towards the beginning.
I used to have a guy that I knew that religiously would, when he changed his oil, he'd pull off his oil filter, he'd cut it open, he'd inspect all the pleats, pleat by
Hmm.
pleat, to see if there's anything shiny, anything sparkly in there. And I know that you folks look at filters from time to time.
We do.
Is there
Yeah.
any benefit of doing that, sending you an oil filter and oil, or instead of oil, or can you tell everything you need to know from the oil and you don't need the filter? Where does that line stand?
So we do test filters. I'd say it's more predominant for the aircraft crowd because there are very specific service bulletins that relate to certain sizes and amounts that can really be of use for people in the aircraft world that have to take the utmost caution. Now,
Mhm.
whether it's aircraft or gas diesel, whatever the engine is that has a filter in place, we can of course check it for visible metal and identify the metallurgy, whether it is brass, bronze, steel is, obviously easy to catch with a magnet, looking at aluminum, identifying these, giving you sizes and amounts. And of course, that is valuable in the sense that visible metal can be further evidence of a problem, but that's really something that, like you mentioned, you can do on your own far cheaper. We're of the mind that, of course, we can do it for you, but it is such an expensive, time-consuming process that we don't really beat down anyone's door for for a filter sample because
Yep.
we're so packed to the brim with oil that we have so much to go around. But we can look at it, and I think in some cases, when people are building as convincing a case that they have a problem, that can give them even more to go on. But I think it's something that, in general, you can rest on an oil sample telling you the essentials. If you're driving a car, that's really going to be your go to for most everything. Filter is a little bit extra in my mind.
I have to imagine that if you get to the point where you're finding chunks of anything in your filter, the oil would have told you long before that you have an
Hmm.
issue.
Yeah, so generally, big problems start with microscopic signs, and that's where the oil sample comes in handy. So, yeah, you're correct in that typically, if it's making big pieces of metal, the smaller pieces have been there for a while. Now, some sudden problems exist. That is an important caveat I will extend in that, you can have sudden problems that come up. Some people will, I'd say it's pretty common, really, for us to see samples where they just left an oil change shop or a dealership and they had the horror story of a bolt being loose and losing all the oil, and they're going down the highway and they suddenly have the motor seize up. So sudden problems happen where there hasn't been time for that microscopic stuff to build up,
Yeah.
but not so common, I would say.
Yeah. I would imagine, though, if you have a hole in the side of the block of your motor because it ran out of oil because it all came out the bottom, no one's going to be sending a filter into you saying, "What's the problem?" So
Yeah.
but your point is very well made, Joe. And dude, I just want to thank you so much. I've kept you on for an hour, and I feel like this has been such an amazing conversation
Mhm.
because it's put me at ease, and I hope it puts my audience at ease in that, just like anything on the internet, the forums and the chatting of how bad things are, when you really look into the science of it and you really get into sample sets and you look at the black and white picture, um, these cars are very reliable. And while it's always really important to do your due diligence, and when you're purchasing a car or running a car, to keep a constant eye on things, just like
Mhm.
anything else in life, um, I don't have to get in my 997 this evening and worry
Mhm.
that I'm going to have a catastrophic issue, because these are really reliable motors. And these numbers you shared with me were absolutely incredible. And I just
Mhm.
really, really want to thank you, Joe. Um, I'm going to have you on the podcast as we go along for sure, because you're my oil guy. But this was awesome. And I hope
Yeah.
anyone that has questions about the health of their motor, whether they're looking to buy a car or they're owning a car and they want to see how their car has been wearing, take Joe up on his offer and go on their website, grab a package, ship in those 3.5 ounces. and get that email. And at least then you have a data point, right? You have a baseline of where your health of your car is. And then from there, you can decide how you want to manage the maintenance from there, therefore, right?
Hmm. Yeah, we're here to help you. And for that reason, if you're interested in oil analysis and you want to know if your vehicle has, signs of bore scoring, signs of this, that, or the other, just let us know. We have an oil information slip where you can voice that concern. And we want to hear from you as well. Let us know if you're seeing signs of trouble on your end. Like if you're wary of bore scoring, are you noticing increasing oil consumption that can speak to that problem on your end? And then we'll attack the metals. We'll let you know what we're seeing on our end. And I think working together with people, that's really where we're able to build the connections and helping them take care of what they own.
Joe Adams of Blackstone Labs. Thank you so much for the time, my friend. I can't wait to have you on again.
Thank you.
All right, my friend.